Welcome back to the channel, you curd nerds. We are on to another episode of the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge broken down in plain English, where we break down the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, Barney style, so that you can get all of the information that you need to become a safe pilot, whether it be a private pilot, whether it be instrument, commercial, bush pilot in Alaska, seaplane pilot in Europe, or all the way up to flying the A380 around the world. The Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge is where you need to start. So, we are out of Chapter 1, which means we are on to Chapter 2. And you know what Chapter 2 is? It's everyone's favorite subject. Aeronautical Decision Making. Now, I promise it's important. I promise. Stay. Okay, we got a couple of y'all to stay. Aeronautical Decision Making is a vital part of learning to be a pilot. ADM is crucial to becoming not only a good pilot, but a safe one. The earlier you start learning aeronautical decision making, the more it shapes your mindset around risk management and mitigation from day one. That's why it's Chapter 2. Because we want to make sure that before you ever touch a yoke, sample some fuel, or check the oil, you are approaching it from a risk management and mitigation standpoint and mindset. So what is ADM? ADM, or Aeronautical Decision Making, is defined by the FAA as a systematic approach to risk management and stress management. The key words being systematic is important because back in the day, decision making was more about a gut feeling than structured thinking. People were just like, it feels good in my gut. Let's go. Send it. Let me light my stogie. Smoking in the flight deck. We're gonna start up this DC-3 and light my cigar. Clear on one, right? But for the past 25 years, ADM has become a key part of every pilot's training. I use it all the time. When me and my friends are debating on flying out for a camping trip and whether or not the weather looks iffy, we bust out a risk assessment matrix. Sometimes we straight up draw it in the dirt and weigh the likelihood of the problem and how bad it would be if that problem were to happen. That's aeronautical decision making in action. We're breaking out a stick, drawing a risk assessment matrix in the dirt and going, okay, well, if the weather does get as bad as we think it might get, well, we'll be stuck here for another day. Is anybody gonna die? Okay, so if the worst thing that happens is we're gonna be slightly inconvenienced and maybe a little soggy, you know what? It's worth rolling the dice. It's worth rolling the dice to hang out for another day. Now, if the weather's saying, hey, tornadoes in the area, maybe we should get the heck out of there, right? So, why did aeronautical decision making become a thing? Well, airlines used to crash a lot. Oh my God, they used to crash a lot. That's expensive, that's deadly. So the industry and eventually the FAA invested heavily into the psychology of decision making and CRM, or crew resource management. And in 1987, the FAA dropped 6 ADM manuals customized for the different pilot levels, whether it be private pilot, instrument, airline, etc. And then they followed up with studies that showed the pilots that got these manuals, learned these manuals, and brought them into their life, into their pilotage. They saw a reduction in errors of anywhere from 10 to 50%. That's huge. And it proved that judgment can be taught, not just developed through years of near misses. There's a adage out there now is that there's old pilots and that there's bold pilots, but there are no old and bold pilots because the bold pilots are usually throwing all 6 of those ADM manuals out the window in cruise. All right, now we need to have a systematic approach to risk assessment, to aeronautical decision making, which is why we have the 6 steps of risk management. Previous to this, we had the Swiss cheese model, which really just was way too vague for anybody to use. It really just said like, hey, if you stack up a bunch of slices of Swiss cheese and like all the holes line up, That's like making a bunch of bad decisions back to back to back that end up in an accident. So like maybe put a slice of cheddar in there and, because cheddar doesn't have holes. What? Like what? It's so obviously, that was way too vague and just really didn't help anybody make any good decisions. I remember looking at the Swiss cheese model while I was going through private pilot. And I'm like, why are we talking about cheese? I'm hungry now. I think I'm gonna go home and make a grilled cheese. Then my instructor's off talking about something else. I'm like, gosh, pay attention. So we came up with the 6 steps of risk management. The first step to any risk management is identify any hazards. Now, a hazard is anything that has the potential to cause harm, right? There are internal hazards and external hazards. An internal hazard could be like you didn't eat, could be lack of proficiency, could be not familiar with this aircraft. An external hazard could be things like bad weather, maintenance issues with the airplane, age of the airplane, stuff like that, right? So identify any hazards associated. And then we're going to assess the risk that might be associated with that hazard, right? So risks is really the likelihood and severity of harm. So probability, likelihood, how likely is it to happen? How likely is it that the wings are going to snap off? Well, it's not very likely, right? As long as the airplane's maintained properly, it's not very likely that the wings are going to snap off. Now, the severity of that would be catastrophic. But given that the likelihood is pretty non-existent, like, less than 1%, then we're not really going to be too concerned about the wings snapping off. But let's say that it's been 6 months since I've flown. Well, what's the likelihood that something bad could happen? Well, it's probably a 50-50 if it's been 6 months since I've been at the controls of an aircraft. The severity could be life-threatening, could be deadly, could be just as bad as snapping the wings off. Well, then maybe I should go with a flight instructor. Maybe I should do something to assess this risk. Which gets us to our next step. We're going to analyze the controls. What can we do to reduce either the likelihood or the severity? Let's take that I haven't flown example. I haven't flown in 6 months example. Well, what could I do to help reduce either the likeliness or the severity? Well, I can't really do much to reduce the severity, but I could reduce the likeliness of something going wrong by going to get flight instruction, by going back up with an instructor, by going to review my notes about this airplane. These are all things that I could do to try to reduce the likeliness of something bad happening, given that if I crash, it's pretty severe. There's not much I can do to reduce the severity of a crash. Then we're going to make a control decision. Now, I like to use the adage, don't be a flat squirrel. A lot of people get hung up on this make a decision point. And I use that adage, don't be a flat squirrel, because have you ever seen a squirrel like try to cross the road and then a car comes to hit it and the squirrel's like, which way am I going to go? Is it that way? And then it's a flat squirrel. Okay. Now, I'm not saying be impulsive with your decisions. I'm saying make one. Do not be paralyzed by a decision, by the need to make a decision. Let's say we've got bad weather in front of us. A thunderstorm is building up. Well, airplanes can't really just stop there in the air, so you've got to make the decision before you become a flat squirrel inside that thunderstorm. So, should we divert? Should we turn around? Should we land right underneath us? Should we push on for some god-awful reason, right? What can we do? Use those controls. Don't just make the decision and then continue on like. I've had students where there's clouds in front of us, look pretty bad, rain's going to be in them, it's going to be pretty turbulent, and the student turns to me and goes, "We should turn around." And I say, "Okay," and the student continues on forward. You gotta use the controls. You gotta implement the decision that you make. And next, monitor the results. You can make a decision and it very well be the wrong one. So you got to monitor the results. Are you getting to where you want to be? Are things trending in the direction that you need them to be for you to either reduce the likelihood or the severity of whatever event might be about to transpire? If not, then start over. Identify the hazards, assess the risks, analyze what controls you have at play, make a decision, use those controls, and again, go back to monitoring the results. This is an ongoing process from when you grab those keys off the hook at your house or from the airport, or when you just decide, hey, maybe I'm gonna go fly today. You are constantly running through these 6 steps. You're identifying hazards, you're assessing risks, you're analyzing what controls you have, you're making a controlled decision, you're using those controls, and you're monitoring the results, right? Let's put this in the context of I have to get somewhere. I have to go from point A to point B. Between point A and point B, there is weather. There's a possibility of moderate rain showers in about a 30-mile range along my route of flight. So, what are the risks associated? Well, obviously, I could end up in turbulence. I could end up in a possibly out of control situation due to that turbulence. I could end up in IFR or instrument flight rules. I could end up in non-visual conditions where I can't see the ground, right? So let's assess these risks. What's the likelihood of me entering these poor conditions with this 30-mile patch of bad weather along my route of flight? Well, it's pretty likely unless I do something about it. Well, what's the severity of this risk? Well, if I end up in a thunderstorm and my aircraft isn't rated for the G loading that is associated with the up and down convective movement, my aircraft could come apart in flight. That's a pretty severe situation. Now, obviously, this isn't happening to airliners. This is like small airplanes and stuff like that. So let's analyze the controls. What could I do to reduce either the severity or the likelihood? Well, I could go around. I'd go around the weather. I could make my flight longer, right? Add an hour to it to get away from the weather. Well, that reduces the likelihood of me entering that weather by a lot. It's probably really unlikely if I give that weather 100 miles of berth so that I don't end up anywhere near that weather. Well, that really reduced the likelihood. Sure, the severity's still high if I end up in that bad weather, but given that there's really not a whole lot of chance of me getting into that weather by giving it 100 miles of range, well, okay, we've assessed those risks. Now, let's make the decision. Let's change our flight plan to go around the weather. Let's use the controls. Let's fly the airplane around the weather. That one's pretty straightforward. Let's monitor the results. Well, let's say I'm pushing on and I get to where I might be encountering that weather and I see that the forecast was a little off and now the weather is going to be a lot closer than what I expected. So let's start over. Identify the hazards. The weather is here. Assess the risk. Well, we are entering the weather, or the weather is a lot closer, so the likeliness of me entering it is a lot higher. Severity didn't ever change. Well, what controls do we have? Well, we could turn around. We could land right now. We could try to give it an even wider berth. I think in this situation, I'd probably either turn around or land. Getting up close to weather and then landing, putting the airplane inside and letting the weather pass over is a whole lot better way to handle it than it is to try and circumnavigate it, especially in general aviation. You start talking about jets and King Airs, of course, it's a little different. So let's make the decision. Okay, we're making the decision to land. Let's use the controls. Fly the airplane to the ground and land. Monitor the results. Okay, we're on the ground. The airplane's in the hangar. What are the hazards? Well, I'm a little hungry now. Maybe I should go get some food. You see how this is just a constantly developing decision-making process. So this entire decision-making process can go awry if we start falling victim to some of the 5 hazardous attitudes. Now, first one is anti-authority. Don't tell me what to do. Now, all of this risk management, all of these 6 steps can be thrown right out the window, or a big old wrench can be thrown into these 6 steps if we start falling victim to any of the 5 hazardous attitudes. So let's go over those 5 hazardous attitudes and then the antidotes to those hazardous attitudes. What we can say either in our noggin or out loud to try and make us recognize, hey, this is what's happening. I'm falling victim to these hazardous attitudes. So the first one up is anti-authority. This is really just don't tell me what to do. This is people who don't like to follow the rules. Now, what I always say is follow the rules. They're usually written in somebody else's blood. Remember, the Federal Aviation Administration is not a proactive organization. It has always been reactive, meaning it responds to tragedy. So when there's a law or a rule, it's probably written that way because somebody else died before it was written. Remember, we didn't always have instrument ratings. Instrument ratings didn't exist in the 40s and 50s. The FAA said, wow, there's a lot of people dying when they go into the clouds. Maybe we should have some training requirements. Impulsivity. Do something, anything, act now. This is from people that think doing something is better than doing nothing. Remember, slow down, think before you act. There was an Atlas crash where the first officer buried the airplane into the ground in excess of 7,000 feet per minute, killing everybody on board because they acted impulsively and didn't slow down and think and read and evaluate the situation. So, evaluate what's going on. Most airplanes are stable. Most airplanes, you can let go of the controls momentarily, take a breath and go, what's going on before you do something? And that's all it would have taken for this FO, this first officer, to not kill everybody on board. Now, it was a cargo flight, so it was only crew, but still. Invulnerability. A lot of people think it won't happen to me. I used to think it wouldn't happen to me until I ended up with 3 engine failures and 1 finally ended up in the dirt. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe I'm not invulnerable. Maybe bad things can happen. So that's the antidote. It can happen. It does happen. Don't bet your life on luck. Macho. If you if you're about to do something that could very easily start with the phrase, hold my beer, watch this, maybe don't. Just don't, right? The antidote is taking chances is foolish. You're not on Top Gun. And then there's resignation, or what's the point? This can happen when people get lost or end up with an engine failure or end up in some poor situation where they feel as if there's no way for them to escape this poor situation. Remember, you're never helpless. There's always something you can do. There's usually a checklist. So let's make sure we watch out for those 5 hazardous attitudes, because the moment any of those start rearing their ugly heads in, those 6 steps might as well be thrown out the window. Now, as a pilot, there are a couple mnemonics that we can use to try and make sure we are always taking a step back and having an objective view over what's going on. And the really overarching one is the PAVE checklist. Now, it's pilot, aircraft, environment, and external pressures. So, pilot, this is how you are evaluating whether or not you, as the pilot, are fit to operate today. And another fun mnemonic that we can use is the I'm safe checklist to evaluate us. Am I safe? I'm safe. The checklist goes illness, medication, stress, alcohol, fatigue, eating, or emotion, right? Illness, that one's pretty straightforward. If you're sick, don't go fly. And when we say sick, I mean anything. Your nose a little stuffy, you got a toothache, your belly's a little grumbly, don't go flying, right? I've talked to buddies that they're like, hey man, like my belly's a little upset, but like I think I'm still gonna go to work today. I'm like, man, do you really want to roll the dice of shitting yourself in the flight deck? Like, imagine going to work every day, now known as Mr. Poopy Pants. You want to roll those dice? Yeah, you want to be known as Mr. Poopy Pants for the rest of your career? No, probably not. So call in sick. You got sick time. Call in sick. If you're a student pilot, don't go to your flight lesson with bubble guts. Pretty straightforward, right? All right, we're done with poop jokes. Medication. If you are on any medication that could possibly impact your faculties, you are not going to go fly. I always recommend that people go reference AMAS Medication Database or Aviation Medical Assistance System. Just Google AMAS Medicine Database. All right. It's a searchable. You can use generic names, prescription names, any of that nonsense to figure out whether or not your medication is safe for you to go fly. Believe it or not, Midol can't fly for, I think it's 48 or 72 hours after one dose of Midol. Yeah, that was surprising. So use the AMAS medication database. Now, it's not a governmental database, so it can be wrong. And if you are really concerned, call your AME, call your aviation medical examiner and be like, hey, like there's this medication. I don't know if I'm safe to fly with it. Or if you think that you're going to ask that question, probably not safe to fly with it. If you got to ask, probably stay on the ground. Stress. That one's seems pretty straightforward, right? If you're stressed out, don't really need to take that into the air. Alcohol. Now, the FAA says 0.04 is the legal limit and 8 hours from your last drink. If you're hungover, you're still under the influence of alcohol, even if you're blowing zero. Just don't go fly. Really straightforward. Fatigue. Don't push through it. If you are EP, if you a EP boy or girl, if you a EP little thing, just go take a nap. Don't go fly. Just go take a nap. As an airline pilot, I love Part 117. Part 117 is the rules that allow me to say, hey, I'm EP. I'm an EP little boy. I need a nap. I'm not safe to fly an airplane with 200 people relying on me right now. I'm an EP boy. I'm going to go sleep now. Okay? Because it keeps everybody safe. Last one, eating or emotion. Eat breakfast. All right. Your brain runs on carbs and protein. I don't care if you're like, I gotta lose weight. I gotta look good in my little swimsuit. This. No. Eat. Like your brain needs sugars and protein and fats and all kinds of goody nonsense. Put the food in your face hole before you show up to a flight lesson. I've had so many students that show up all sleepy and groggy, and I'm like, did you eat breakfast? They're like, a slice of bread. Like, what do you mean a slice of bread? Like a toast? They're like, no, I just grabbed a slice of bread out of the bag and just on the way over here. Like there was one student, he showed up to a flight lesson like with a piece of white bread that he had like crushed up into a ball and he was eating it. Like it was, sorry. Eat. All right. And when it comes to emotion, if you're having a bad day, take a day off. Right? You just got dumped, take a day off. Right? You need to go talk to somebody, do it. All right. I know you'll probably hear from a lot of old heads when it comes to talking to somebody, talking to a mental health professional when it comes to that emotional side of being fit. And they'll tell you that don't. Like, oh, dear God. If you do it under a pseudonym. Pay cash. Never get a diagnosis. Now, the FAA has recently changed their stance on pilots and mental health. Pilots can receive a diagnosis for adjustment disorder, even adjustment disorder with depressed mood for a singular event, as long as it's not found as chronic or reoccurring, right? So chronic depression, chronic anxiety, stuff like that. All right, go get the help that you need. And it very well could be a very long drawn out process for you to get to the flight deck. If it's, hey, my kid's in the ICU and very possibly going to die, go talk to somebody. Adjustment disorder, even with depressed mood, for a singular event where symptoms are resolved, an AME can still issue your medical. So if you are not feeling okay, go talk to somebody. And this is from somebody that spent 2 years and $20,000 working with the FAA to get my medical back after talking to somebody in Afghanistan. I also went to DC and helped lobby for change so that it would get to this point where you could go talk to somebody. So if you need to reach out, please do. Now, the next one on the PAVE checklist is aircraft. Is the aircraft legal? Is the aircraft capable? Are you familiar with this aircraft? Is the aircraft up for the journey? Taking something like a Cub from Southern California up to Northern New York, sure, technically, it's possible. Is it smart? Maybe not, depending on your experience, depending on how familiar you are with this aircraft. Are you used to taking a small 65 horsepower airplane with absolutely no useful load, no range, and no speed on a 30-day trip across the country? No? Then maybe don't try it. Maybe start with some smaller trips, like maybe California to Vegas, maybe California to Arizona, stuff like that, right? So just make sure the aircraft is up for the mission and you are up for the mission in that aircraft. Next one is going to be environment. Now I know environment technically starts with an E, but we couldn't really do a PAVE checklist, right? So PAVE, V for environment. Terrain, airports, airspace, NOTAMs. Can you legally and safely fly into the mountains at night with a 14,000 foot ceiling and a Cessna 172 with 180 horsepower ceiling, 180 horsepower single engine? I don't know. Probably not. Right? Rocky Mountains, they're pretty tall. Should you really be flying around in the Rocky Mountains at night with an airplane that only has a 14,000 foot service ceiling? Well, I'm going to leave that up to you. But that's why we run through these 6 steps. That's why we run through this checklist. Next one is external pressures. Now, get there-itis is a really big one that gets a lot of people. We got to get there. 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 Well, maybe you don't. Maybe you ain't got to get there. Maybe you can get there a day late. Maybe you can leave early and get there a day early. Or things like impress the date syndrome. Don't let the mission override your safety. And I want to talk about content creation when it comes to external pressures. I have gone and flown with a couple of buddies that want to push it to get the shot. Don't. It's not worth it. Okay? If you are out there trying to make videos, remember, your primary focus is operating that aircraft from engine start to engine stop, tied down, chocks in. That is your primary mission. You want to make videos? Ensure that it is done in cruise, in safe conditions, or somebody else is operating the camera equipment. At no point should you be on final going, is my camera running? Is my camera running? Oh, but what about the one on the wing? Is the one on the wing working? No. All right. You also shouldn't be flying low level to try and get a shot. If it's not safe, it's not safe. The shot is not worth the risk. The juice is not worth the squeeze. Okay? Be safe out there. All right. Now, I'm going to tell you a personal story. And what I want you to do after this story is I want you to go to the comments and tell me what hazardous attitudes you notice in this story, what external pressures you notice in this story, what personal limitations I probably broke in this story. So me and my now wife had just started dating, and I really wanted to impress her. You know, she was a pilot, I was a pilot, so I wanted to plan us a nice little Valentine's Day flying, camping kind of day together, right? You can feel the external pressures building already, can't you? Right? Now we took off into IFR. It was 600-foot ceilings, 4-mile visibility, and rain. And we had to go straight through the Phoenix class Bravo airspace on IFR flight plan. I departed the Chandler Airport straight into the clouds in a 6-pack with really minimal avionics. You can already tell the environment, the aircraft, and the external pressures are getting me to push things in this flight. When driving, obviously would have been safer and probably the more enjoyable option. As we flew through the clouds, we got some decent turbulence in some busy airspace until we ended up getting north of Phoenix, where the clouds cleared up and the radios got quiet. Once we got closer to our destination, it was a small dirt strip in the middle of the desert. Have you ever tried to find a small dirt strip in the middle of the desert? It's pretty hard. It's pretty hard, right? Because it all looks the same. Like a dirt runway and dirt desert, it all just looks like dirt. Okay? So it was kind of hard to find it when the only GPS that we had was an iPad. We land and the ground is squishy from all the rain that had passed through in the morning, making the taxi and parking a monumentous task. Another bit of the environment not being good for this flight. We end up staying, had a good time while we were there until we realized we had no Wi-Fi and not really enough signal for a good weather briefing. I decided that we could go anyway and stay local in the area until we could get a hold of flight service in the air. We got a hold of flight service in the air, talked to them about the weather ahead, going back to Phoenix. It wasn't great, but as long as we stayed below the freezing level, we should be safe. So we decided to push on since we had to get the rental airplane back in time. Oh, look, some get there-itis. Obviously, we found the freezing level to be lower than what we expected. We asked ATC for a lower altitude to try and get out of the icing, which worked for a little bit until we started hitting rain. And at that point, the ice really started to pick up on the airplane. We told ATC and got on the ground at the closest airport to reevaluate our plan. We got on the ground safely and with a little bit of ice built up on the airplane that was easily taken care of when the sun came out in an hour or so. We ended up getting back later than planned with a more stressful and dangerous trip than if we would have just driven. Now, this entire time, my wife told me that she'd rather drive and that it probably would have been safer, but I was stuck on my plan to fly. Now, obviously, looking back on this, I can recognize that I made poor decisions and I'm not proud of it, but using this as an example of what seems to be within your limits at the time can quickly get out of your it can get out of hand. Now, we talked a little bit about personal minimums. Personal minimums are something that you should be developing now. What are personal minimums? There are legal minimums, right? Sure, class golf, 1 mile visibility, clear of clouds, right? Bravo, 3 miles, clear of clouds. These are the minimums. Like, hey, you can't do this VFR legally below these. Aircraft limitations, right? Some airplanes have crosswind limitations. The Cessna 172 says it has a demonstrated crosswind of 15 knots. That means the test pilot tested it up to 15 knots. That doesn't mean the aircraft's not capable of it, but what's your limitation? Length of flight. There's no legal requirement that's not associated with fuel when it comes to length of flight. Are you comfortable flying 3 hours? Are you comfortable flying 8 hours in a single day? I know there's another creator, Jason Shepard. He starts a little timer. The moment he gets to the airplane, he starts a little stopwatch and he wants to be on the ground, chocks in aircraft tied down before that timer hits 3 hours and 30 minutes. That's well below what I'm comfortable with, but those are his personal minimums. That's what makes them personal. They're not somebody else's. So don't ask your instructor, hey, what should my personal minimums be? Figure them out for yourself. As a student pilot, your personal minimums should be flying with your instructor. Anything other than flying with your instructor, you're not going to do, obviously. Now, once you get to the point where you can solo, you should probably have something in mind. Like, are you comfortable with 7 miles of visibility? If you've done all your training in Arizona where the only thing you get is more than 10 miles visibility and sky clear, well, maybe 7 miles of visibility for a solo isn't going to be for you. If you spend a lot of your time in Wisconsin or Florida or, someplace that gets a lot of rain and the visibility can drop to 5, 6, 7 miles, and you've done that a lot with your instructor, maybe those should be your personal minimums. They are personal. And don't just leave it with crosswinds. Don't just leave it with weather. Don't leave it with these like basic simple things like, hey, I haven't eaten in 2 hours. Am I okay to go fly? Maybe I should eat something. Now, there are a lot of other acronyms and mnemonics and buzzwords that you can use to really build your aeronautical decision making toolbox, to build your aeronautical decision making skills. But really the takeaway is all takeoffs are optional, all landings are mandatory, and make sure that they're going to be safe. If you can't be dang sure that you're going to be able to get that aircraft on the ground safely, you probably need to do something to reduce that risk. Go with an instructor, delay the flight, etc. So if you've got any questions about aeronautical decision making or anything else we've covered in any of these other episodes, please leave them down in the comments. I love reading through them, and we'll answer them in the next episode. And as always, say it with me, fly safe and keep it cheesy.